Hello class, welcome to lesson 4.4c, which is all about solving inequalities using multiplication or division. Yesterday you should have watched the video about how to solve inequalities using addition and subtraction. Today we're taking it one step further with multiplication and division. So let's start with example 1. We have two different inequalities, so I'm going to label them quickly. I'm going to say that this is A and this is B. This is A, this is B, just so we keep it straight when we're graphing things. Okay, so starting with letter A, let's solve 5x is greater than 30. So if I write that out, I'm going to tee it up just like we were with equations. I have 5x is greater than 30. If I have 5x, what operation am I doing there? I'm not saying an operation, that means it is multiplication. So we have 5x multiplying 5 times x. How do we undo multiplication? We divide. So I'm going to divide this side by 5. And if I divide the left side by 5, that means I have to divide the right side by 5. So I'm left with x is greater than, what's 30 divided by 5? 6. Alright, so let's practice our graphing skills now. So letter A, let's look at the top number line because I have it labeled as letter A. So we have x is greater than 6. So I find my number, I find 6 in this case, and I have to figure out, is it going to be an open or is it going to be a closed circle? X is greater than 6. It's going to be an open circle because we don't have the or equal to. Okay, so we have x is greater than 6. So now I look at my number line. If I go to the left, I have 5. Is 5 greater than 6? No. If I go to the right, I have 7. Is 7 greater than 6? Yes. That means I'm going to shade this way on the number line. So that would be my answer for 1A. I solved it and I graphed it. Let's look at 1B. Solve 7x is greater than 21. Again, I'm going to tee it up. I have 7x. I'm not saying an operation there. That means I am multiplying. So 7x, to undo multiplication, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to divide both sides by 7. So I'm left with x, carry down my inequality sign, it stays the same, is greater than, what's 21 divided by 7? We have 3. So now I go down to the bottom number line because I have it labeled B, and I find the number 3. Now, is this going to be an open or a closed circle? I have x is greater than 3. Since I didn't say the words or equal to, that means it's an open circle. Now I have to figure out which number is greater than 3. Is 2 greater than 3 or is 4 greater than 3? 4 is. That means I'm going to shade on this side of the line. So that's how we would solve those first two inequalities. Now let's move on to the next example. We have solve h divided by 4 is less than or equal to 3. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing over here as I did on the last slide. I'm going to label these again, just so we can keep them straight. So solving h divided by 4 is less than or equal to 3. How do we undo, I'm saying h divided by 4, that means I'm dividing. So how do I undo division? I multiply. So what am I going to multiply by? 4, because that's the number that I'm dividing by. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 4. I'm left with h, carry down my symbol, and what's 3 times 4? 3 times 4 is 12. So now if I go to my number line, I have h is less than or equal to 12. So if I go to my number line, I have to add a couple of lines so we can get to 12. All right, so h is less than or equal to, so is it going to be an open or closed circle? I said the words or equal to, so that means it's going to be a closed circle. And h is less than or equal to 12. So which way is going to be less than? Going to the left. All right, let's do letter B. We have k divided by 11, or k over 11, is greater than or equal to 2. So how would I solve this one? K divided by 11, I'm going to do what operation to undo division? Going to multiply. And what am I going to multiply by? 11. Remember, what I do to one side, I must do to the other. So I'm left with k is greater than or equal to, what is 2 times 11? That would be 22. If I were to graph that, that's going to go way off my graph. It's going to be farther than this, but it would be 22. We'll say, pretend is right there. Is it going to be an open or closed circle? It's going to be closed because I said or equal to. And k is greater than or equal to 22. So am I going to point to the left or the right? Going to the point to the right because bigger numbers are to the right. All right. Now let's look at our next example. Notice, before I move on, that in both example 1 and example 2, that I have a positive 4 here. I have a positive 11 here. And if I go back to the last slide, I have a positive 5 in letter A, and I have a positive 7 in letter B. So let's talk about what happens if those numbers are negative. So if I want to solve this equation, I have negative 1x is less than or equal to 5. If I want to solve this, what operation am I going to do? I'm saying negative 1x. I'm not saying an operation there. That means we're multiplying. So to undo multiplication, we are going to divide. What I do to one side, I must do to the other. Now, what am I going to divide by? Am I going to divide by 1, or am I going to divide by negative 1? I want to divide by negative 1. I don't like when my variables are negative. That's just confusing. You always want your variables, so your letters, your x's, whatever letter they use, you always want those to be positive. So we have negative 1x. So we're going to divide that by negative 1 on both sides. So this becomes, we have a negative divided by a negative. That means we now have a positive. And then what's 5? A positive 5 divided by a negative 1. That's going to be positive divided by negative. The negative, and 5 divided by 1 is 5. Now be careful. The way this works is whenever you divide by a negative number on both sides of the equation, that means that you take your sign from up top here and you flip it. Okay? So if you divide by a negative number on both sides, you are going to flip your sign. Okay? If you divide by a negative number, you are going to flip your sign. So now let's graph this. Alright, we have x is greater than or equal to negative 5, so I find my negative 5. I said or equal to, that means I have a filled in circle. And x is greater than, so that means, as I said in the last example, greater than means you point to the right. The bigger numbers. Alright, let's do another example. We have negative 4x is less than or equal to 4. Again, we have a negative 4x, so that means we're multiplying negative 4 times x. Undo multiplication, we're going to divide both sides by our negative 4. So then I have x. I divided both sides by a negative, so I'm going to flip my sign. And then what's a positive divided by a negative? That becomes negative. And what's 4 divided by 4? 1. So now I find my negative 1, and x is greater than or equal to, so it's going to be a filled-in circle, negative 1. I said x is greater than or equal to, so that means I will point to the right. Okay? So, just to recap, whenever you divide, oops, it would help if I spelled divide correct. Divide both sides of an inequality by a negative number, flip the sign. Okay? Now let's look what happens if we have to multiply by a negative number. The same thing happens. So just like you, whenever you divide by a negative number, on both sides you flip the sign. Whenever you multiply, alright, so now we have solve negative 1/3. Or actually, we'll want a little more room. Solve negative 1/3 f plus 1 is less than or equal to 4. So if I were to solve this, just like when we did two-step equations, we started with the numbers that were not connected to the letters, to the variables. So first things first, I have a plus 1. I'm going to subtract 1. So I now have negative 1/3 f is less than or equal to 3. Since I only subtracted 1 from both sides, the sign gets to stay the same. Now let's look at the next step. We have a negative 1/3 f is less than or equal to 3. So I'm multiplying negative 1/3 times f. That is a fraction you're multiplying. That means we need to divide. In order to divide fractions, that's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. Okay? So I'm going to multiply both sides by a negative 3/1. So I'm left with f, and then I multiplied both sides by a negative number, so I have to flip my sign. So it becomes is greater than or equal to, what's a 3 times a negative 3/1, or negative 3? That is the same as negative 9. So I find negative 9. It's f is greater than or equal to, so I fill in my circle, and I shade to the right. Alright, let's look at the next example. We have negative 1/2 d plus 2 is less than or equal to negative 2. I have a plus 2 that's not attached to my d, so in order to undo the plus 2, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. It means I have a negative 1/2 d is less than or equal to negative 4. Since I was only subtracting, I don't have to flip my sign. Alright, so now I have negative 1/2 d. That means I'm multiplying negative 1/2 times d. In order to undo that multiplication, I'm going to divide. Dividing fractions is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So that's negative 2/1. What I do to one side, I must do to the other. I'm left with d. I multiplied both sides by a negative number. So that becomes a greater than or equal to. We have negative 4 times a negative 2/1, which is the same as negative 4 times a negative 2. Negative times a negative is a positive, and 4 times 2 is 8. So if I look at this next one, I have d is greater than or equal to 8. I said or equal to, that means filled in circle. D is greater than that, so I'm going to shade to the right. Alright, and let's look at our last example. Word problem. We have a plate weighs 1/4 pound. A shelf can hold at most 20 pounds. Write and solve an inequality to find how many plates the shelf can hold. Okay, so let's underline some important details. We want to find the greatest number of plates that the shelf can hold, right? So I'm going to say that x equals the number of plates. That's what we're trying to find. Number of plates the shelf can hold. And let's try to write an inequality. We know each plate weighs 1/4 pound. So 1/4 pound times the number of plates we have, right? And we know that the shelf can hold at most 20 pounds. That means the weight of our plates has to be less than, or it can be equal to 20 pounds. So now what we have to do is we have to solve for x. So we have 1/4 x is less than or equal to 20. Multiplying fractions or dividing fractions is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So we know that we have x is less than or equal to. I don't flip my sign in this instance because I multiplied by a positive 4. And what's 20 times 4? 20 times 4 is 80. So what does this mean? We have x is less than or equal to 80. So let's go back. What did we say x was? So we know the number of plates the shelf can hold is at least, or has to be fewer than 80, or it can be equal to 80. So we know that the shelf can hold at most 80 plates. All right. Hopefully this assignment isn't too hard for you, but if you have questions, please let me know. I'll be back tomorrow to help and answer questions. Have a great day.